This result is deeply disappointing for everyone who so desperately needed real change in our country. I want to thank everyone who campaigned and every single person who voted for the Labour Party. As leader, I take full responsibility for the result. We must now take time to reflect on what has happened, to listen and to understand. The attacks on us from some in the media have been more ferocious than we've ever known, but I'm proud that no matter how low our opponents went, we refused to join them in the gutter. I'm proud that ours was a people-powered campaign, not bankrolled by billionaires. And I'm proud that our message was one of hope rather than fear. Ultimately, the divisions in our country over Brexit were too great for us to overcome in this election. But as the 2017 election showed, our programme is popular: ending austerity, protecting our National Health Service, investing in communities, and tackling the climate crisis through a green industrial revolution. I'm proud that our movement has created a new political mainstream, one that is firmly anti-austerity and supports public ownership, which has inspired millions of people to engage in politics for the first time. Make no mistake, Labour is the greatest force for progressive change this country has ever known. And though this wasn't our moment, our time will come. Because over the past 4 years, we've built a new movement which isn't going away. So to those who feel disheartened and feel like giving up, I say stay and fight for a better society. And to those who haven't yet joined us, join the Labour Party today. Be part of the resistance to Boris Johnson and the politics of fear. This starts now. Campaigning to protect our communities, our National Health Service and public services must be relentless, so that when elections come, we will be bigger and stronger. We will win. We will unite our country. We will build a society for the many, not the few.
This is difficult to listen to. I am proud. Now, I say everything in this video as a Jeremy Corbyn supporter, so do not misunderstand me. None of this is personal animosity or spite. I love the guy. But this was a brutal loss. I mean, we're talking about 80 seats that they ultimately lost, meaning a majority of 80 seats for the Tories. And not just that, this is the worst loss going back to something like 1935. So I am proud, fair enough, but it's not about pride, it's about winning. At a corpse, this deformed, broken, mutilated, and beaten, there is typically an autopsy. And I mean that doubly so in the political sense. And I would say lefties, don't turn away from this. There are several things that you can learn from this particular election on the move, the counter move, but also more along the lines of weakness can't be tolerated. And giving in to people who hate your guts doesn't necessarily make you stronger, especially since they hate your guts and they ultimately want your downfall. I want to talk about Corbyn's, you can say, the reason why he failed. And don't misunderstand me. You know, a lot of these neo-libs and a lot of these, you could say, right-wing Democrats are trying to make this kind of things that, you know, attack lefties because of what took place to Corbyn, as if these things are synonymous with one another. They are not. In fact, I don't know what Corbyn could have done if Brexit was an overlying issue. Let's say this was just one campaign versus another campaign and these guys were going by their way. But there are several overriding issues in this. Also, this notion that Al Gore lost, John Kerry lost, and Hillary Clinton lost, all of these people were outright right-wing Democrats. All of them lost continuously. And they never shut up about lefties. Nevertheless, let's talk about why Corbyn lost. And I want to give a few points. One autopsy for Jeremy Corbyn. Welcome to the soapbox.
This morning I went to Buckingham Palace and I am forming a new government. And on Monday, MPs will arrive at Westminster to form a new parliament. And I'm proud to say that members of our new One Nation government, a people's government, will set out from constituencies that have never returned a Conservative MP for 100 years. And yes, they will have an overwhelming mandate from this election to get Brexit done, and we will honour that mandate by January the 31st.
He's right. Many of these constituencies, including apparently mining constituencies, voted for one Boris Johnson, Conservative MP. People who have never voted Conservative before. That's something that needs to be reflected upon, especially from the standpoint of Labour. And I mean more so from... There are aspects of Labour that are synonymous with aspects of the United States, meaning you can say the Clintonites versus the Blairites, those type of things. And I have no belief that those people are going to reflect on failures. So, not that. But people who back Corbyn should. People who back Corbyn should. I want to talk about a few of the issues that I think this campaign had, and the reason why this campaign was doomed. And you could almost make an argument doomed from the start. And there were certain red flags that were kind of popping up that Corbyn either ignored or fundamentally was cowed in a way where he didn't have the power to do anything about. One of those is incompetence. The other one is just an inability to lead or weakness. In the beginning, Labour agreed to the referendum. The public comes out, mass show of direct democracy. What do you want? They say, yes, we want Brexit. We want to leave. Corbyn, a Eurosceptic himself, who can't even get his policies enacted, by the way, being within the European Union, said he'd back the referendum, but did so in a sheepish way because the members of his party weren't on board. A slew of people in his own party who hated his guts wanted to either revoke Article 50 outright or have a referendum, which was a de facto revocation of Article 50. It's just a patina of, quote unquote, democracy on it. But ultimately, a lot of people who were pushing him, who were around him, that he kept in the party, wanted to revoke Article 50, either through a referendum or the outright revocation. One of the canaries in the coal mine, though, that this was not necessarily the best of strategies, was the Brexit Party. The Brexit Party had double-digit percentage points in the UK from the standpoint of the election, but also they won in spades in the European Union Parliament election. This, however, did not deter Labour from sliding to a position of referendum. Theresa May eventually collapses. Theresa May, shockingly, kept getting punched in the face day after day after day, and at the end of the day, nobody knew whether or not Theresa May was still going to be in office, and yet she kept ticking along with a stiff upper lip, dancing along the way. She eventually collapses. We are in the age of Bojo. Now, if you could give Bojo a theme song, that theme song would be Brexit. I'm the guy that's going to get Brexit done. I'm going to get it done, or I will be dead in a ditch. October 31st, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I am Bojo. I'm the man for the job. We've been talking about Brexit for 3 years. I am going to get it sussed out. That's who I am. I'm Bojo. And 2 points here. Strategy of Bojo. Jeremy Hunt himself said he is going to end up in a general election because ultimately Bojo has the exact same parliament that Theresa May had. Theresa May couldn't do anything. That parliament was crippled. Bojo is going to have the exact same parliament. How is he going to affect something that Theresa May could not? That's the first point. Bojo always wanted an election. That needs to be understood. First point, strategically. Bojo always wanted a general election. Now, when I say that, there are 2 points to this. One, the dead in the ditch thing. Making October 31st, saying, I'm going to get us out by October 31st. That is a poison pond. That's a poison pond. Now, all things being equal, yes, he would rather get them out by October 31st if he could. But what he secretly wanted to do, that he implicitly implied even at one point, I even did a video when he said that and implied it. He wanted an election. He wanted an election. He understood fundamentally that he couldn't get anything done with this particular parliament. Meaning, when Bojo was saying October the 31st, he was being disingenuous. He was lying on its face. He had to know that there was no way he could get it done on October the 31st. And yet, he gave this date. And giving that date, Labour and the opposition parties all rallied around that date and consumed that poison pond with this notion that we're going to do everything in our power to stop Bojo from getting this done on that specific date. And in doing this, they joined in this, you could say, unity of convenience against Bojo. The catch here, though, is that despite being able to tie Bojo in knots, everything that they did, despite him failing from the standpoint of Parliament in the political sense, his polling stayed the same or went up. And if you remember, Bojo continuously asked for a snap election. The key point to understand, though, is the 2 points work in tandem, meaning A, he wanted an election. No, he wasn't going to tell people that, but he wanted an election. And B, the October 31st poison pond. Them focusing so much on stopping him from October the 31st helped the first point of the election. The theme of Bojo, I'm going to get Brexit done. I'd rather be dead in a ditch on October 31st. I'm going to get Brexit done. All of the parties try to stop him from getting Brexit done. The public sees all of the parties trying to stop him from getting Brexit done, him doing exactly what he said he was going to do when he got in office. And he calls for an election. Now, the catch here is that the moment that Labour gets what he wants, or the moment that the other parties get what they want, meaning stopping him from October 31st, it's not like his political time ended. In fact, them getting what they wanted allowed Bojo to say, you have no other excuses. You have no other excuses. Give me my election. Now, up to this point, all of the parties, including Labour, has said, we can't give you an election because you may get a no-deal Brexit. You can take us out. The moment that all of the humiliating paperwork is signed, they're forcing him to go begging for an extension. The moment that the extension is given, the moment all that takes place, the excuse, the fig leaf of, we're not going to give you an election because of X, goes away. Lib Dems, SNP, we want an election. Labour, we need to confer. Labour was terrified because Jeremy Corbyn he understood that Bojo is only asking for this election because he believes that he can break Labour, and he's a much better campaigner than Theresa May. He has a charisma about him that takes up a room. I said going back almost a month ago when Bojo got into the race that he is a dangerous campaigner, and whereas Corbyn could beat Theresa May, I have qualms about whether or not he could beat Bojo. And in this very specific instance, Corbyn had those same qualms. Go and look back at those debates. When he asked for an election, Corbyn was shuffling his feet, not wanting to do so. He got dragged and kicking to the woodshed. The public can see that. So a prime minister or a leader of the opposition that looks weak, especially from the standpoint of his position on Brexit, meaning he's fence-sitting, he's calling for a referendum when a referendum has already taken place, looks that much weaker in the sense of being judged in the fires of an election. It just looks bad. The tactics of stopping October 31st essentially fed into the election. The thing that Bojo wanted anyway. I hope you understand what I mean. From a strategic standpoint, Bojo wants the election. He also wants to get out on October 31st, but he wants the election. Everything that Labour and the other parties did to stop him from getting October 31st fed into his argument that A, we need to have an election, and B, Parliament is stopping me from delivering Brexit, the thing that you put me in office to do. It's fascinating politics. I mean, like from a strategic and from a strategic and tactics point of view. I guess my point is the tactics enshrined Labour as a Remain party. A de facto Remain party that didn't want to say that they were a Remain party. That's a problem. That's a complete problem. To be clear, Jeremy Corbyn's position on this that he had to run on in the election was that he was going to send people who were Remainers to negotiate a third deal with the European Union. And those Remainers, if they get a deal, was going to bring that deal back and put it up for a referendum, another divisive referendum, essentially scrapping the first show of direct democracy. On the agenda was going to be that deal made by those Remainers and staying in the EU, essentially revocation of Article 50. And Corbyn himself, leader of the opposition, who supposedly was working to get this deal, is not going to take a position. The Prime Minister is not going to take a position and go for his own deal. And the people who went to get that deal are going to lobby against it and vote against it. How can you support this? It's the weirdest thing in the world. Now, the catch here is that the theme of Bojo is Brexit. This election was about Brexit. That was the key sticking point in this election. Bojo was screaming about freedom and democracy and everything else, but the only reason he could take that position is because Labour abandoned that position. The public said, we want to leave. Labour said, we'd honor the referendum. Then Labour chooses to, okay, we're going to scrap the first referendum and have another one. We didn't like the results of the first one. So now Labour looks like a Remain party. Bojo is the only guy that's pushing for Brexit. The Brexit party's numbers dwindle because at this point they're like, all right, Bojo's going to deliver Brexit. The Lib Dems want to scrap it altogether. The person who's leader of the Lib Dems loses her seat. She is the cheerleader for this notion of getting rid of Brexit. She lost her seat. Bojo wins a mandate to deliver Brexit. Essentially, his argument that Parliament is stopping me from delivering Brexit is accepted by the public, and they give him the numbers that he needs to do what he says he wants to do. My point is, it repudiates this notion of a referendum. It repudiates the people who are pushing for this notion of Remain. The referendum was the election. And it seems that Labour fundamentally misunderstood that. Or Labour was fundamentally unable to do anything about it. Meaning, Jeremy Corbyn, as leader of the opposition, was either too weak to change the party into something that made sense from the standpoint of a policy, as opposed to being cowed by the Remainers in the party, and couldn't do anything about the fact that this election was on Brexit and change his position on this. Or they just didn't understand that the election was going to be a referendum. I don't know how they couldn't. One party was pushing for Brexit, another party was pushing to stay. You have options. The notion of taking the option back to the public in a divisive referendum just seemed like an albatross. And on top of that, the Scottish National Party was going to get their referendum. This was an albatross. It was an albatross around his neck. And he had to run with this. So what did Corbyn do? Corbyn raised up issues like the NHS, which is a real issue, by the way. The corporations that are in the United States, when given the opportunity, will go after elements of the NHS. They will pilfer, they will rip it apart. It is absolutely on the table. Boris Johnson is not being honest with you if he's telling you that under no certain terms is anything for the NHS or drug prices, those things going to go up. They will. I've shown it in my other video where even his own team says, yes, those things will be on the table. And American corporations will try to rape you blind. So, yes, that's a real issue. But that wasn't the whole point. Again, theme of Bojo is Brexit. This election became an issue of Brexit and whether or not the public will give him the ability to do what he needs to do from the standpoint of Brexit. Labour heartlands, places that never voted Labour before, came out in order to put Bojo in that office. And I would wager to you, this is not just this hatred of Corbyn, which some people have. This is, and has a lot to do with, yes, weakness on some part, but also how Parliament has engaged this. And I know this goes back to Theresa May, so fair enough. But Parliament was going to willfully ignore the will of the public. Even I have qualms with that, and I'm a Corbyn supporter. And it seems that I'm not alone in that. A lot of people did. And unfortunately, yes, the NHS will be up for grabs on this. But by the same token, you stuck people in this weird position of, do we want to fight off a threat from the NHS, or do we want to deliver Brexit? And the public, in my estimate, was choosing Brexit. And the public did, overwhelmingly, with a mandate, chose Brexit. The fault does lie with Corbyn, by the way, but it doesn't lie with him in the way that the mainstream media is spinning it. They're trying to say, oh, he went too far to the left, this is Corbynism, all that stuff. Nonsense. This is everything to do with the overriding issue of Brexit and the way Labour has handled itself on this specific issue. Just like the United States parties, we have, like, think of it in terms of the United States. And think of it in terms of, let's say, Sanders versus somebody like a Clinton or Biden or some of these other elements of the party. You have Pelosi, Schumer, and Buttigieg going for this kind of anti-Sanders meeting in order to try to stop Sanders. These are people who are third-way Democrats who are a ruling faction within the context of the Democratic Party. And those people would rather Trump win than Sanders. They're not hurt by Trump in office. It's just the rest of the public. I'm making the point to you that the same thing is true in the UK. You have a leader of the opposition, Corbyn. They hated his guts. They would rather to see Corbyn drowning in his own blood, and they would sit there and eat their scones or crumb cake or whatever. But this guy's in charge. They don't like his policies. They don't like his foreign policies. They don't like the fact that he's supportive of Palestine. None of that stuff. And they take a position that is entirely untenable from the standpoint of the public, and they push him and drag him to that untenable position. And they go into an election with the prime minister, or with Jeremy Corbyn, holding that untenable position, because all of these elements in the party are saying this is what you must do, meaning they want to remain. And he has to run with that. And so he runs the race that he can run. I'm going to bring up broadband. I'm going to have, all this money to the NHS. I'm going to plant 10,000 trees a day. I'm going to do all of this other stuff. Problem. That's not one of the questions on the marquee. The questions on the marquee is, what are you going to do about Brexit? And ultimately, on the most important question of Britain's generation, Labour punted. It's an untenable position. That's my point. That's my point. The people who hate him are going to blame him for it all. And this is kind of goes back to the third way Democrats thing. If Sanders lost, the hatred and vitriol that will be released, lefties, pay attention to what is taking place in the UK and watch your lighter brother in this case, because your lefties over there are getting slammed. They're getting slammed. And I would imagine that many of those other people in the Labour Party who hate Corbyn's guts are smiling. They're not hurt by Bojo being in office. That's my point. They would rather be in power than necessarily to have somebody else who's in their party in power. Ultimately, though, yeah, I guess you could say the fault lies with Corbyn. He allowed those people who hated his guts to remain in the party. He wanted to compromise, but he compromised so much that he became in somewhat of an untenable position as opposed to leading. And I mean leading empowered by the public that said, we want to leave. And to own that and do what you need to do in order to defend that particular position, seeing that was your original position in the first place. He didn't push back, and he accepted the narratives on the anti-Semitism stuff. I mean, look, this is an autopsy. There are lists of things that you can go through from the standpoint of strategy or from the standpoint of even the slurs and everything else and how the person responded to those things. Ultimately, Corbyn, who I think is a decent, good man and will probably make an amazing prime minister, was just too weak to do this particular task. And maybe you could say, how can he be a good prime minister if he's going to be weak too? Fair enough. But from a policy standpoint, love the guy. But the weakness thing ate him alive. And even if it's just on this notion of him leading and not being cowed by the party to take this kind of weird position on Brexit. But Brexit was this election. That's what this election was about. And a public who's trying to figure out what they're going to do on this issue, Labour decided to not take a position. That is absolutely and entirely, I'm sorry, weak. This is Corbyn. He's talking about the election result in an interview.
And very sad for many people in this country who will now have a government that is continuing policies of austerity, and many of the poorest communities, I think, will suffer very badly from the economic strategy that I suspect the Prime Minister will take forward. But also, I have pride in our manifesto that we put forward, and all the policies we put forward, which actually had huge public support on issues of universal credit, the green industrial revolution, and investment for the future. But this election was taken over ultimately by Brexit, and we as a party represent people who both voted Remain and Leave, and my whole strategy was to reach out beyond the Brexit divide to try and bring people together, because ultimately the country has to come together. So
to reach beyond the Brexit divide, but that's just it. This is kind of my point, right? I did a video almost, I think it was over a month ago, and I said, look, if you're going to have an election, you need to clear the board. And what I meant by that is, you're in a new day. I mean, ultimately, you took a position to tie the Prime Minister in knots, and you were able to accomplish that. You tied the Prime Minister in knots. But now that you're having an election, it is a credible case to make that, look, now that we have an election, Labour is able to implement what it considers to be Brexit. And in implementing our choice for Brexit, you can make your case. Meaning, your initial position was, okay, we'll do a referendum if we can't do anything else. And then it just became, we want a referendum. I made the point back then that an election is a new day. It's a start over. There was no way to reach beyond the Brexit divide in the age of Boris. Since Boris's entire point, the entire reason he got that job, keep in mind, Theresa May got that job for one reason, Brexit. Bojo takes over her mantle and her task because the overarching thing in British politics is Brexit. And the notion that you're going to do an election that is clearly about Brexit and you're going to try to reach beyond Brexit, well, nobody knows what happens after Brexit. It's like an event horizon of sorts. You have to solve that first. You have to hit that head on. And if you know your position on that is a little dodgy, it's just aggravating. It's just aggravating, that's all. I've been watching some of my fellow lefties in the UK on this, and it's painful. It's painful. All right, I'll end this. Like, class is not individuals. Nope, class is a group. The difference between Corbyn and Sanders and Trump is that Trump has strength to respond to arguments. Bart Bliski. So maybe, I mean, my thought was Sanders is stronger than Corbyn on this. Lefties have a tendency to be, I guess you can say, more pacifist, more willing to compromise. And those are not necessarily traits shared by their opposition. And so, you know, it's like I keep saying Ned Stark's got his head chopped off. Well, yeah, Ned Stark's got his head chopped off. He was trying to be a noble man in an environment that didn't allow people to be noble men. This is political space. And Corbyn had people around him that was giving him horrendous advice, and he went with it. Not to mention shredding his own friends. I'll leave this here. Like, share, subscribe. Ray Rushton. Did Corbyn really want to become prime minister? Somebody else asked that. I think so. I mean, I don't necessarily think he just tanked it. I really do believe he could make a case bad at it. He was able to get 2017 bumped because Theresa May was a horrible politician, but also because at the very least, he stuck with the referendum. He didn't lose those seats that were Labour held for all of those years. In this case, he abandoned the result. And there were a lot of people who did not like his Brexit position. I mean, this was before the election when you would talk to people and the thing kept coming up over and over and over again. And the polling kept showing Conservatives far ahead in the lead. So kind of how it is. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks so.